Welcome, dear friends, to another tale from beyond the hills and through the whispering woods. Tonight, we journey into a world of small adventurers with big hearts, where ancient forests hide secrets and courage is found in the most unexpected places. So, find a comfortable seat, let the crackle of the fire keep you warm, and step with me into the story. Children of the Tower Song. The green wild forest rose at the very edge of the valley, dark and endless, its treetops like waves frozen in place. To most folk of the hill villages, the green wild was a boundary, not a destination. Stories clung to it. Old warnings whispered beside fires, passed down from parent to child. Never step beneath those trees, never follow the shadows, for the forest does not give back what it takes. The little people of Bramblehold believed it without question. They tilled their gardens, carved their burrows into the soft hills, baked bread, churned butter, brewed ale, and lived in the safety of what they knew. They were happy enough, so long as no one asked about the trees that loomed to the north. But not everyone was content with quiet gardens and safe paths. Tobin Underbaugh sat on the old stone wall at the edge of the fields, staring out at the green wild. His curly hair was windswept, his boots muddied from the morning's wander. In his lap lay a small bundle, a length of rope, a water skin, and a pocket knife. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Behind him came a voice, low and teasing. "You've been staring at that forest since dawn, planning to walk in and never come back?" Tobin turned to see his cousin Bramble Tunnelfoot leaning on a stick, grinning, his cheeks round from too much berry pie. Bramble was no picture of a daring adventurer, but his eyes carried the same restless glint as Tobin's. "I've been thinking," Tobin said slowly. "Why should we sit here, all our lives, staring at those trees and fearing them, when they're right there waiting? What's so dreadful in them? Wolves? Bears? We've traps for that. Shadows? The dark doesn't bite." Bramble's grin widened. "You're going in, then?" "Not alone," Tobin answered, hopping off the wall. "But I'll go. Someone has to. Don't you ever wonder what lies beyond? What's hidden under those branches?" Before Bramble could answer, a third voice chimed in. Sharp, clever, and impatient. "I knew it. I knew you two thickheads would plot something like this." Out from behind a hedge stepped Lark Fairbriar, her brown curls tied back with twine, her belt heavy with pouches. She was the daughter of the village healer, clever with herbs and quicker with words. "My mother says that forest swallows the foolish," she said. "And if anyone's foolish enough to test that, it's you two. Then come along and keep us from being swallowed," Tobin said with a grin. Lark folded her arms. "I didn't say I was going," but her eyes strayed toward the forest, and she bit her lip. By noon, the three of them stood at the border of the green wild. The fields ended abruptly here, grass giving way to thick roots that bulged from the earth like sleeping serpents. The air shifted, cooler, damper, filled with scents of moss and bark. A breeze stirred the leaves, and the forest seemed to breathe. Bramble swallowed hard. "If our parents find out..." "They won't," Tobin said firmly. "We'll be back before they notice." He tightened the strap of his pack. "Or maybe not. Maybe we won't come back at all. Not yet. Maybe we'll find something worth staying for." Lark frowned, though her fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel. "If we die, I'll never forgive you." And with that, the three of them stepped beneath the trees. The light dimmed at once, shifting from bright gold to soft green. Sunlight fell through high branches and scattered beams, painting the ground in shifting patterns. The air was thick with the smell of leaves and damp earth. Strange birds cried in the distance, their calls sharp and echoing. They walked slowly at first, their feet sinking into moss, their eyes wide. Everything was larger here, the trees rising like towers, the ferns arching overhead, the mushrooms thick as plates. It was as if the forest had grown for giants, not little folk like them. After a while, Bramble whispered, "I don't see anything dreadful." "Maybe dreadful hides," Lark muttered, but Tobin only smiled. His heart beat fast, not with fear, but with a joy he had never known. The air hummed with possibility, as if every leaf whispered secrets waiting to be found. Hours passed. They followed no path, only the pull of curiosity. Bramble found a stream, its water glittering in the dim light, and they drank from it. Lark gathered leaves and berries she recognized, tucking them in her pouch. Tobin ran his hands over stones carved with grooves, half buried in the soil. "Look at this," he murmured. "Marks, not nature's work." The others knelt beside him. The grooves curved and crossed, forming patterns too careful to be chance. Lark traced them with her finger. "These are old, very old. Proof," Tobin said, his eyes bright. "We're not the first to walk here." Before Lark could reply, a low sound rumbled through the ground. It was not thunder, though it seemed to echo like it. The three froze. The leaves above shivered as if stirred by a hidden hand. Bramble's voice quavered. "What was that?" Tobin rose slowly, his hand tightening on his knife, though it looked pitiful against the vast trees. "Something," he whispered, "something that means we were right to come." The forest seemed to lean closer, listening, and with that, their journey into the green wild truly began. The sound faded, leaving behind a stillness so deep it rang in their ears. Bramble shifted his weight from foot to foot, his round face pale. "Maybe it was just a tree falling," he whispered hopefully. "No tree makes the ground shake," Lark replied, her eyes sharp. She tucked a stray curl behind her ear and straightened. "It came from deeper in. Whatever it was, it didn't notice us yet. That means we keep moving, but carefully." Tobin grinned despite himself. Lark always pretended not to care for adventure, but here she was, giving orders like a seasoned scout. Carefully, then, he agreed, and the three pressed on. The forest thickened. Vines hung in curtains, thick moss wrapped around roots like blankets. Every step revealed something new. A hollow log with glowing fungi, a bird with feathers the color of embers darting past, a stag whose antlers gleamed faintly as if dusted with silver. But it wasn't just beasts and trees. Here and there, the ground bore signs of something older. Stones too straight to be natural jutted from the soil. They passed a wall, broken and half swallowed by ivy, its stones wide and smooth, joined without mortar. Tobin ran his hand over the surface and felt a faint warmth in the stone, as if it remembered long ago fires. "Someone lived here," he whispered. "Not someone," Lark corrected. "A people, a whole people." She pulled a scrap of parchment and a bit of charcoal from her satchel and began sketching the wall. "This is history. We're walking through forgotten history." Bramble frowned. If it was forgotten, maybe it was for a reason. "My uncle says places get abandoned when they're cursed or rotten." Tobin shook his head. "Or when folk grow afraid, like ours did. Look at us. We've let fear keep us away, and this is what we've missed." He gestured around, eyes shining. "This forest is alive with wonders." As if to answer him, they came upon a clearing. The canopy opened above, spilling sunlight like golden water onto the mossy ground. In the center stood a stone pillar, taller than three of them stacked. Its sides were carved with symbols, faint but still clear, spirals, runes, stars. Lark sucked in a breath. "An obelisk." Bramble tilted his head. "A what?" "A marker," she explained, circling it slowly. "Used to show paths, to mark places of power. My mother told me stories of them, but I never thought I'd see one." Tobin stepped closer, running his fingers over the grooves. The stone felt cool at first, then warmer, as if it recognized his touch. A faint hum filled his ears, so faint he wondered if it was only his imagination. Bramble tugged his sleeve. "Let's not poke at things we don't understand." But Tobin's heart raced. "We're the first in generations to touch this. The first to know it still stands." He smiled, though his hand trembled. "This is proof enough that we were right to come." Before Bramble could argue, Lark gasped. She pointed to the base of the pillar, where something glinted beneath moss. Tobin knelt and brushed it aside, revealing a shard of crystal no larger than his thumb. It shone with a soft blue light, like moonlight caught in glass. They all stared. "It's beautiful," Lark whispered. "It's dangerous," Bramble muttered. Tobin held it up, the light reflecting in his eyes. For a moment, the forest seemed to lean in, shadows sharpening, beams of light bending. The hum grew louder, wrapping around him like a song without words. Then it stopped. The crystal dimmed to a soft glow, steady but quiet. Lark reached out and touched it lightly. "It's old magic, the kind our folk pretend never existed." "Do you know what this means, Tobin?" "The green wild isn't empty. It's keeping things. Things powerful enough to frighten our ancestors." Bramble swallowed. "And we're carrying one." Tobin tucked the shard carefully into his pouch. "All the more reason to keep going. If this is what lies at the edge, what might we find at the heart?" The others exchanged uneasy glances, but neither turned back. They left the clearing behind, the pillars standing silent as it had for centuries, watching them go. The air grew cooler as they pressed deeper, the trees older, their bark thick as walls. Paths appeared where none should be, faint trails of stone half hidden by roots. It was Bramble who first noticed the shapes in the distance. Towers of stone, crumbled but still reaching skyward through the canopy. He stopped dead. No, we're not walking into ruins. Everyone knows ruins are haunted," Tobin teased, though his voice shook with awe. "Not haunted," Lark said firmly. "History." She gazed ahead, her charcoal poised. "A forgotten city. We found a forgotten city." And indeed, as they stepped closer, the forest opened to reveal it. Walls wrapped in vines, arches broken but grand, courtyards where trees grew from cracked flagstones. Birds wheeled overhead, their cries echoing off stone long silent. The green wild wasn't just forest. It was a graveyard of a civilization, and the three of them had stepped into its heart. Tobin smiled, unable to contain his wonder. This is only the beginning. The ruins did not welcome them with fanfare. They crept into view slowly, as though the forest itself tried to hide them until the very last moment. First a broken archway, then a toppled column, then whole stretches of wall entangled with vines. Only when the three travelers stepped across a wide stone path, cracked by roots, softened by moss, did they truly see it. "This place," Bramble whispered, his round face pale. "It feels like it's watching." Tobin swallowed, though he refused to show his own unease. "Everything here is old, that's all. Stones don't watch." Lark didn't answer at first. She knelt by the edge of the path, her fingers brushing over lines in the stone. Faded carvings of animals, stars, and flowing water. "No, but someone once made them watch. See here? They carved guardians. It was their way of marking who belonged and who didn't." Bramble shifted uneasily. "And we don't belong. Not yet," Tobin said, trying to sound braver than he felt. His hand brushed against the pouch where the crystal shard lay. Somehow, its faint glow comforted him, though it also reminded him that the forest carried power their kind had long forgotten. They pressed deeper into the ruins. The air grew hushed, muffled, as though the stones themselves soaked up sound. Their footsteps echoed strangely, louder than they should. Even Bramble's nervous muttering came out as a whisper against the towering walls. Between the buildings, roots twisted like snakes, wrapping around doorways and spilling across flagstones. Birds flitted overhead, but never landed within the walls. It wasn't empty, though. Now and then, Tobin thought he saw movement, shadows sliding between the columns, a rustle too heavy for a bird, too soft for a deer. He glanced back once and swore he saw two faint glimmers, like eyes, vanish behind a stone arch. But he said nothing. If he told Bramble, they'd turn back. If he told Lark, she'd demand proof. So he kept walking, though his skin prickled and his grip tightened on his knife. At last, They reached what must once have been a square. The remains of a fountain stood at its center, its bowl cracked, its statue worn smooth by rain. Around it rose buildings, some still tall, others broken to rubble. Lark circled the fountain, excitement bright in her eyes. A meeting place. Look at how it's laid out. The market must have been here. Families gathering, traders calling. This city wasn't just stone, it was alive. Bramble kicked at a pebble, frowning. And now it's dead. There's a reason it's empty. Tobin was about to answer when a sound split the silence. Not the cry of a bird or the rustle of leaves. This was deeper, harsher, a low scrape like stone grinding against stone. All three froze. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the faint thud of something heavy shifting. The hairs on Tobin's arm stood up. He glanced toward one of the ruined archways, its shadow thick and unmoving. Yet something stirred within it, something too large for comfort. Bramble grabbed his sleeve. "We should leave. Now." Lark's eyes were wide, but her voice was steady. "No sudden moves. Whatever it is, it hasn't come out yet. If we bolt, we might make ourselves prey." They stood in the square, hardly daring to breathe, the air tight in their chests. The scraping stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. Tobin forced himself to take a slow breath. "It's watching," he murmured, the words slipping before he could stop them. Lark shot him a sharp look, but she didn't argue. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sighing groan, the shadow in the arch shifted back into stillness, as though whatever dwelled there had decided, for now, not to step forward. Bramble's grip loosened on Tobin's arm. His voice shook. "I told you, this place isn't right." Tobin didn't answer. His heart still pounded, but something burned beneath the fear, curiosity. If creatures guarded these ruins, it meant there was something worth guarding. Something more than broken stones and faded carvings. He touched the pouch where the crystal lay. The faint hum stirred again, just enough to remind him they had already been chosen by the forest. "Come on," he said at last, his voice quiet but firm. "We move, but we stay sharp. The green wild isn't empty. We'll just have to learn how to walk in it." The three of them slipped from the square, their footsteps soft as the breath of the forest. Behind them, the shadow beneath the arch shivered once more, two faint glimmers sparking in the dark before fading like dying embers. They didn't look back. They followed a narrow street, the stones beneath their boots uneven and half swallowed by roots. Ferns burst through cracks, and wildflowers nodded from windowsills of houses that leaned inward, as if whispering secrets to one another. The silence was thick, but it was no longer suffocating. Now, the ruin seemed almost alive, not threatening but watchful. Bramble walked a little closer to Tobin now, though his earlier trembling had eased. He still cast wary glances behind them, but he wasn't muttering about turning back anymore. His round cheeks were pink with exertion and curiosity. "It must have taken hundreds of hands to build this place," he said softly, tracing a finger along the edge of a doorway carved with spirals. "Look at that detail. No farmer back home ever carved like this." Lark's face brightened. "Exactly. These weren't ordinary folk. They lived for craft, for beauty. See how the lines curl into one another? That's a symbol for water flowing. Whoever they were, they wanted their homes to breathe with nature, not fight against it." Tobin let their voices wash over him, relieved to hear the wonder creeping back in. He, too, felt the strange pull of the ruins. At first, it had been fear sharp and cold. But as they walked, something else took hold. Like the place wanted to share its memory, if only they dared listen. They came upon a building larger than the rest. Its roof collapsed, but its walls still sturdy. A wide doorway yawned open, shadows stretching deep inside. "Shall we?" Tobin asked. Lark didn't hesitate. She ducked beneath a hanging root and stepped inside, her boots crunching against fallen plaster. Bramble lingered a moment, his nose twitching as though testing the air, before he followed. Inside, The light was dim, filtered through cracks in the broken roof. Dust motes drifted like tiny spirits, though none of them thought the word. Wooden beams lay in heaps, long since gnawed by insects, but the stonework held. Against one wall, they found carvings, rows upon rows of symbols etched deep into the stone. Some resembled trees, others stars, others spirals. Lark ran her fingers across them as though touching the words themselves. "This is language," she whispered, all flooding her voice. "A whole history written here, waiting to be read. Do you understand any of it?" Bramble asked, his tone more curious than fearful. She shook her head, biting her lip. "Not yet. But look, this one repeats, see? Over and over." She traced a curling mark shaped like a rising sun. It must have been important. While she studied the wall, Tobin wandered further into the hall. At the far end, half buried beneath rubble, he saw a pedestal. The stone was cracked, but something rested atop it, a shard of metal, thin and gleaming despite the dust of centuries. He bent down and brushed it clean. It wasn't whole, only a fragment of a blade, but the edge still caught the light with a sharp gleam. Strange runes etched along the side pulsed faintly, as though alive. "Lark," he called softly. She hurried over, her eyes widening at the sight. "That's not just a weapon. That's crafted with intention. See the lines? This was meant to channel something." "Magic," Bramble breathed. "Perhaps. Or maybe just a strength our people never knew." Tobin held it carefully. The weight felt right in his hand, though it hummed faintly, unsettling and familiar all at once. It reminded him of the crystal shard in his pouch. Before they could say more, the sound came again. Not the grinding of stone this time, but a low, rumbling growl, deep, resonant, vibrating through the floor. All three froze. It came from outside, from somewhere along the street they had just walked. Slow, deliberate, not rushing. A creature moving with patience, with weight. Lark's eyes darted to Tobin's. It followed us. Bramble's hand clenched around a piece of wood from the floor, his jaw set in determination. Not panic this time, but resolve. Then we should see what it wants. Tobin swallowed hard, the fragment blade gleaming in his grip. "Not here. We'll draw it into the open. Come on." They slipped out the far side of the hall, through a gap where the wall had crumbled. Outside, vines draped over fallen stone, creating a curtain that half hid them. They crouched low, peering back toward the street. From the shadows between the ruined homes, something stirred. At first it was only a ripple, like the forest itself shifting. Then a shape emerged. A hulking form low to the ground, its body covered in bark-like plates that shimmered green and gray. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with malice, but with an ancient steadiness, as though it belonged to the ruins more than the ruins belonged to themselves. The creature's breath rumbled like wind through hollow logs. It paused at the doorway of the hall they had just left, lowering its head to sniff the air. Bramble's knuckles whitened around his makeshift club. Lark pressed a hand to his arm. "Not yet. Watch." They held their breath as the beast lingered. Then, with deliberate calm, it turned away and padded down another street, its movements heavy but unhurried. When it was gone, Bramble let out a shaky laugh. "It didn't attack." "No," Lark said slowly, her brow furrowed. "It's guarding, watching like the stones themselves. These ruins aren't abandoned. They are protected." Tobin looked at the shard in his hand, its faint runes pulsing like a heartbeat. The creature had sensed them, yet it hadn't struck. A chill worked its way up his spine. The forest hadn't rejected them. Not yet, but it was testing them, weighing them like stones in a hand. And tests, Tobin knew, always had consequences. They didn't speak until they were certain the creature had gone. The forest song slowly returned, birds calling faintly from the canopy, the rustle of leaves shifting in the wind, but the air still carried the echo of that low growl. It lingered in Tobin's bones like a drumbeat. They slipped back into the broken hall, where the dust still hung heavy and the carved walls seemed to listen. Tobin set the shard of the blade on the pedestal again, its runes pulsing faintly, as if even the metal was aware of what had just passed. Bramble slumped against the toppled beam, his face pale. "Well," he muttered, though his voice was steadier than before. "I suppose we're not the only ones living here after all." Lark paced near the carvings, her eyes bright and troubled. "Not living, guarding. Did you see the way it moved? That wasn't a beast hunting for food. It was watching. Protecting. Protecting what?" Bramble asked. "The stones? This hall? Us. Not us," Tobin said firmly. He rubbed the back of his neck, thinking of the glow in its eyes. "We're strangers here. Trespassers, maybe." The word weighed heavy in the silence. For a moment, doubt crawled into their little circle, whispering the same words their families had muttered back home. Best to stay away. Best not to disturb what wasn't yours. But then Lark lifted her chin. If this place truly was meant to be forgotten, why does it still stand? Why do the carvings still speak, even if we can't yet understand them? Why does the shard still gleam? "No, Tobin, we were meant to find this. We're not trespassing. We're answering." Her words sparked something inside him, a warmth that cut through his fear. He remembered the crystal shard in his pouch, how it had hummed when they stepped into the ruins. These pieces were connected, he was certain. Bramble looked between them, chewing his lip. "So, we're just going to keep walking about until it decides we're worth squashing flat." "No," Tobin said. "We need a plan." He crouched beside the pedestal, laying his hand on the shard of the blade. If it's guarding, then there's something deeper it doesn't want just anyone to find. That means there's a center to these ruins, maybe a hall, maybe a tower. Whatever it is, that's where we'll learn why this place is watched. Lark nodded, her braids swinging against her shoulder. "And we can't go blundering in. We'll need to move carefully. Stay together. Mark our path so we don't get lost." She gestured to the carvings. "And I'll copy some of these symbols as we go. They might help us later." Bramble sighed, but his shoulders straightened. "Fine. But if we're marking paths and drawing symbols, I'll gather supplies. If we're to keep wandering in this maze, we'll need food. And firewood. And maybe something sharper than broken sticks." He glanced meaningfully at the shard, though he didn't argue when Tobin lifted it again. "Good," Tobin said. "We prepare. Tonight, we rest here. Tomorrow, we go deeper. With care." The hall seemed to breathe with them, as though the stones themselves approved. They worked quietly for the rest of the evening. Bramble sorted through his pack, pulling out dried fruits and small loaves they had brought from the village, arranging them neatly on a cloth. Lark traced symbols into her journal by the light of a lantern, murmuring to herself as she worked. Tobin sat with the shard in his lap, turning it over, feeling its hum grow stronger when the night air deepened. At last, they settled near a corner where vines formed a shelter, their lantern dimmed to a soft glow. The forest outside shifted with unseen movements, but none of them spoke of the creature again. Instead, Bramble whispered, "Do you think anyone has sat here before us, long after the city fell? Travelers like us?" Lark smiled faintly, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "If they did, maybe they left something behind for us to find." And with that hope curling between them, the three friends drifted into uneasy dreams, while the ruins held their watch. Morning came slow and golden. A shaft of sunlight slipped through a crack in the roof, landing on the shard of the blade like a blessing. Tobin was the first to wake, and when he saw the glow, a certainty filled him. Today would change them. They packed in silence, each moving with quiet purpose. Bramble tied up the last of their bread and tucked it into his satchel. Lark checked her journal, sliding a charcoal stub behind her ear. Tobin wrapped the blade fragment in cloth, keeping it close to his chest. Outside, the ruins looked different in the light. What had seemed shadowed and haunted now shimmered with dew, moss glowing green and flowers pushing through cracks. The city wasn't dead, it was sleeping. "Ready?" Tobin asked. Lark nodded. Bramble muttered something about being born ready, though his hands fidgeted as they set off. They moved carefully, marking their path with bits of cloth tied to branches and stones. The streets wound like rivers, bending and folding back on themselves, but Tobin trusted his instinct, following the faint pull in his chest that seemed to hum whenever they turned the right way. The deeper they went, the more the ruins changed. Walls leaned higher, their carvings more intricate. A broken archway bore the image of a great tree whose roots curled into the stone like veins. Pools of still water mirrored the sky above, and in their reflections, strange shapes flickered, like the faces of those long gone. It wasn't long before they heard the guardian again. The rumble came from far off this time, echoing through the streets. They froze, crouching behind a wall, their breath shallow. "It knows we're here," Bramble whispered. Lark's eyes shone, not with fear, but wonder. "It's guiding us." Tobin felt it too. The growl hadn't been aimless. It had come from ahead, the very path they were already following. They pressed on, hearts pounding, until the streets widened into a vast square. Here, the ruins opened into a grand courtyard, its floor cracked but still patterned with stone mosaics of sunbursts and rivers. At its center rose a tower, half collapsed but still reaching for the sky, its peak lost in the branches of trees that had long since claimed it. The guardian was nowhere in sight, but its presence hung thick in the air. Bramble let out a low whistle. "That's it, isn't it? The heart." Tobin nodded, his hand tightening around the shard. "Whatever answers we seek, they're in there." And as they stepped toward the tower, the wind stirred, carrying with it the faintest sound, like voices, not threatening, but layered with time. The ruins were ready to speak. The tower loomed above them like the trunk of some giant tree, half stone and half root, its walls cracked but stubbornly standing. The closer they came, the more the carvings revealed themselves, spirals and symbols Tobin couldn't name, and long lines of figures marching in patterns that made Lark stop in her tracks more than once, sketching furiously in her book. The great door lay on the ground, shattered into slabs. Vines crept across it like veins, their leaves silvered in the morning light. Tobin touched the wood and found it smooth, worn as if countless hands had brushed it in the years before it fell. "Looks like an open invitation," Bramble muttered, peering into the dark. "Or a warning," Tobin said, but his feet carried him forward all the same. The air inside was cooler, touched with the smell of stone and damp earth. Dust floated in shafts of light that pierced through cracks in the walls, catching on fragments of what had once been a grand hall. A spiral staircase wound upward along the edges, broken in places but still climbable. They moved cautiously, their lantern light flickering across relics scattered on the ground, shards of pottery, scraps of rusted metal, and bones. Not human, nor hob, nor anything they knew. The bones curved strangely, rib cages wider, skulls longer, their shapes pressing unease into Tobin's chest. Lark crouched, running her fingers gently across a shard of pottery painted with faded blue lines. "These aren't just ruins," she whispered. "They lived here. They ate. They worked. She stopped herself, eyes flicking toward the bones. Bramble shivered. Lived and then didn't. Tobin placed a steady hand on Lark's shoulder. "We should keep moving. Whatever's here, whatever's left, we'll honor it by listening." They climbed. The staircase creaked beneath their weight, every step echoing into the hollow chamber. Higher and higher they went, past empty alcoves where once perhaps statues or torches stood, past windows broken open to the forest air. At one landing, they found a shelf carved directly into the wall. Dust coated the surfaces, but within the stone recess sat a cluster of objects. Small crystal jars, their stoppers long gone, and a single staff snapped in two. Its wood was pale and veined, like driftwood polished by the sea, and though broken, it still gave off a faint warmth. Lark's eyes widened. This is important. Look at the carvings. It was set here deliberately, like a relic. Tobin reached for it, hesitant, but when his fingers brushed the wood, A pulse of warmth shot up his arm. It wasn't sharp or painful, just steady, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. He gasped softly and drew back. Bramble grimaced. "You don't think it belongs to that thing out there, do you?" "No," Tobin said, certain though he couldn't explain why. He wrapped the staff carefully in a scrap of cloth and tied it to his pack. "Whatever this tower holds, it wanted us to find this." They continued climbing, silence pressing close as they reached the higher levels. At last, they came to a chamber with walls that still stood tall. The ceiling above had long since fallen, letting sunlight spill across the floor in great golden beams. At the center sat a dais, carved with spirals like the ones outside. Upon it rested an orb of crystal, faintly glowing from within, as if holding the morning itself inside. They froze. Lark stepped closer, her breath catching. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Tobin did. The same hum he had felt from the blade shard and the broken staff now surged stronger, pulling at his chest, calling to him. The orb seemed alive, its light shifting gently, like the glow of embers in a fire. But before any of them could move further, the air grew colder. A shadow slid across the chamber, though the sun still shone above. From the stairwell below came the sound they had been dreading, low, deep, and unrelenting. The Guardian. Bramble's hand went to his belt, though he had no real weapon. "It's here," he hissed. Tobin's pulse thundered in his ears. The orb pulsed again, brighter, as though answering. The choice was clear: run, or claim what had drawn them here. Tobin stepped forward. The growl deepened, rolling up the stairwell like thunder climbing a mountain. The walls seemed to tremble with it, dust trickling from cracks in the stone. Lark grabbed Tobin's arm. "We don't know what will happen if you touch it. We know what will happen if we don't." Bramble shot back, eyes fixed on the darkened stair. Tobin's hand hovered over the orb. The light inside flickered, then steadied as though waiting. His chest tightened. Fear, yes, but also something else, something that felt like trust. He pressed his palm to the crystal. The orb flared, filling the chamber with golden light. Warmth poured into Tobin, flooding his limbs, rushing into the shard of the blade and the broken staff he carried. The runes on the blade fragment lit up like fire, and the snapped wood of the staff hummed as though yearning to be whole again. The Guardian arrived. It was larger than Tobin had realized, filling the doorway with its bulk. Its form was not entirely flesh, nor entirely shadow, something between, its body shifting like smoke wrapped around muscle. Its eyes glowed the same gold as the orb now blazing in Tobin's hand. The growl died into silence. For a long, frozen moment, they stared at one another, the small hob with his hand on the crystal and the great Guardian with its golden gaze. Then the creature lowered its head, not in submission, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. Lark gasped softly. Bramble whispered something like a prayer. Tobin's heart pounded as the orb's light dimmed, sinking back into the crystal until it was just a faint glow once more. He lifted his hand slowly, the warmth still thrumming in his chest. The Guardian stepped back from the doorway, its eyes never leaving his. Then, with a low rumble like distant thunder, it turned and moved down the stairwell, vanishing into shadow. The chamber grew still again. Bramble was the first to speak. "So it didn't kill us." Lark smiled faintly, though her voice trembled. "No, it tested us." She touched the carvings on the dais. It wanted to know if we would claim this with fear or with respect. Tobin looked at the orb, now quiet and steady on its pedestal. He didn't know if it belonged to them, if it was meant to be taken or left. But he did know one thing. They had been seen. Chosen, perhaps. He turned to his friends. "We go deeper. Whatever lies at the heart of this forest, we're not meant to turn back now." And with the orb's glow guiding them, they prepared to descend further into the tower. The tower's stairwell spiraled further down than they had expected, each step echoing like drops of water in a cavern. Their lantern light stretched only so far, but the faint glow of the orb made shadows retreat as though unwilling to come too close. Tobin carried it carefully, wrapped in a cloth, yet even hidden, its warmth pulsed against his side like a heartbeat. They descended slowly, the air growing colder, heavier. Strange etchings reappeared on the walls, spirals, runes, and what looked like maps of stars. Lark paused often, sketching feverishly, muttering under her breath about forgotten constellations and charts of seasons long gone. Bramble, meanwhile, kept his hand near the dagger he'd borrowed from his uncle, his eyes darting constantly into the dark. "Why is it always down?" he grumbled. "Never up, never a nice open hilltop. Always down into places where things hide." "Because that's where secrets lie," Tobin said, though his voice was tight. At last, the stairwell opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but great stone pillars rose like trees, supporting what remained of it. Between them, rows of statues stretched outward, some cracked, some fallen, others standing tall as if keeping vigil. The statues were not of hobbits, nor elves, nor humans. They were taller, robed, their faces long and angular, hands clasped around staffs or blades. Some bore wings carved delicately from stone, folded across their backs. "They're guardians," Lark whispered, "or priests. Maybe both." She reached out to touch one, then hesitated. Tobin stepped closer to another, brushing dust from its base. A single rune was carved there, the same one that had glowed faintly on the shard of the blade. It pulsed once as his fingers grazed it, then went still. Bramble swallowed hard. "They're watching us. Or waiting," Tobin murmured. They moved carefully through the hall of statues, their footsteps muffled by the layer of dust on the stone floor. At the far end stood a great archway, sealed by a door of dark metal, its surface rippling faintly like water, though it was solid to the touch. As they approached, the orb in Tobin's pack grew warmer, until it shone faintly even through the cloth. He drew it out, and the door responded, the rippling growing brighter, clearer, until patterns formed across its surface like waves of light on a pond. Lark gasped. "It's a lock. The orb is the key." Tobin lifted the crystal higher, and the surface of the door parted soundlessly, dissolving into air. Beyond lay another passage, one that sloped deeper still. But before they could step forward, a sound rippled through the hall. Not the Guardian's growl this time, but something sharper. A skittering like claws against stone. The statues behind them shivered. Dust cascaded from shoulders and wings. One of the robed figures cracked down the middle, stone flaking away to reveal movement beneath. A limb flexed, jointed wrong, too many bends. Another statue followed, then another, shapes splitting open, stone shells sloughing off as creatures crawled free. They were not the robed figures the statues had seemed. These things were leaner, twisted, with skin like granite and eyes glowing faintly blue. Their mouths were jagged lines that opened too wide. Bramble cursed under his breath. I knew it. Always something waiting. Tobin clutched the orb tighter, the warmth steady in his hand. The creatures hissed at its light, recoiling, then began circling, seeking angles. They don't like it, Lark whispered. The light, it holds them back. Then we use it, Tobin said, though his throat was dry. He lifted the orb high, and the glow spread outward brighter, steadier. The creatures shrieked, clawing at the ground, unable to draw closer. But there were many of them, too many, and the light, though strong, trembled as though it couldn't hold forever. The choice was clear: retreat or press deeper. Tobin glanced at his friends, their faces pale but determined. Through the arch. Now, they ran. The creatures screamed, their bodies thrashing against the light as the three slipped through the open doorway. As soon as they crossed, the door sealed behind them, the rippling metal solidifying once more. Darkness swallowed the passage ahead. The orb's glow was the only thing left. And the danger behind them was only the beginning. The new passage narrowed quickly, forcing them to walk single file. Their breaths sounded too loud, echoing back at them in unsettling ways, sometimes twisted, sometimes delayed, as though more than 3 voices whispered in the dark. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel widened into a round chamber. At its center stood a pool of perfectly still water, its surface glass-like, reflecting the orb's glow. Carved into the walls were hundreds of runes, their lines flowing together like a river of symbols. As the orb's light touched them, faint colors flickered across the stone, blue, green, gold, rippling like fireflies trapped in rock. Lark dropped to her knees, staring wide-eyed. This is its history, all of it. Look, the lines connect, they're telling a story. Tobin knelt beside her, tracing one of the flowing lines. What does it say? I don't know yet, but she paused, tilting her head. They're singing, and indeed, a faint hum filled the chamber. The runes vibrated softly, their tones weaving together into chords that shimmered just on the edge of hearing. The water in the pool trembled with each note, patterns forming on its surface like ripples caught in time. Bramble, uneasy, kept his distance. I don't like it. This is too close to magic. The wrong kind. There is no wrong kind, Lark said firmly. Only misunderstood. Tobin stared into the water. Reflections moved there, though not their own. Figures tall and robed, carrying staffs, placing crystals like the one he held in alcoves, speaking words he couldn't understand. For a heartbeat, he saw their faces clearly, serene, solemn, filled with purpose. Then the water shifted, and another image appeared. Darkness swallowing the halls, statues cracking, shadows rising. The same creatures they had just escaped flooding through the chamber. The figures fell, one by one, their lights extinguished. The hum of the runes deepened, resonating with a sorrow so sharp Tobin's chest ached. They were keepers, he whispered, and they failed. Lark's eyes shimmered. No, they left it for us. For someone. The orb, the staff, the shard, they're pieces of what they carried. Maybe they knew someone would come after. Bramble scowled, but there was no strength in it. And if those things outside break free? Tobin's grip on the orb tightened. Then we don't fail to... The water rippled once more. This time, instead of shadows, a path appeared, spirals leading downward toward a great chamber lit by a crystal heart larger than any they had seen. The hum swelled, filling their bones. A direction, a purpose. Tobin rose, helping Lark to her feet. The heart of the tower. That's where this leads. And what waits there? Bramble asked. Whatever they meant us to find. The path was clear, but so was the weight of the choice. And still, step by step, they prepared to follow. The water's rippling map faded back into stillness, but its images lingered in their minds. Keepers, shadows, and at the center, a glowing crystal heart. Tobin stood with the orb clutched close, its warmth steady in his hand as if to remind him they weren't walking blind. Lark traced one of the runes on the wall, committing its shape to memory, while Bramble rubbed his hands against his trousers, glaring at the pool as if it might leap up and drag him in. Down, Tobin said at last. The path goes down. Bramble groaned. Of course it does. Next time, we adventure up a mountain instead. Or a nice orchard. But he followed. The chamber gave way to another corridor, this one carved with precision. Arches supported by pillars etched with spirals of stars and rivers. Their steps echoed strangely, as if the air itself carried memory. Sometimes Tobin thought he heard a second set of footsteps just behind them, but when he turned, there was only the faint shimmer of the orb's light stretching backward. The corridor spiraled tighter and tighter until they emerged onto a ledge that wrapped around a vast shaft plunging straight down. At the very bottom, impossibly far away, a dim glow pulsed, slow, steady, like the breath of something alive. The heart, Lark whispered, leaning over the edge. Her voice trembled, not from fear but awe. A narrow staircase clung to the wall, spiraling into the depths. Some of its steps had crumbled. Gaps yawned black, showing only air beneath. Their lantern light barely touched the first curve before the dark swallowed it. Bramble paled. If you think I'm stepping on that death ladder, you've gone mad. Tobin held the orb higher. Its glow spread, reaching farther than flame could, and for a moment the staircase shimmered faintly, as though the stone itself remembered its shape. The missing steps filled in with light, insubstantial but enough to show the path. Not a death ladder, Tobin said softly. A bridge of light. They went single file again, Tobin first, orb in hand. The steps groaned underfoot, but held. Where stone failed, light carried them, shimmering under their weight like glass that somehow didn't break. The descent seemed endless. Wind whispered up the shaft, carrying faint notes of the hum they had heard before. Lark murmured under her breath, half to herself, half to the air. They sang as they built. They sang to the stones. That's why it remembers. Halfway down, the hum shifted. Louder, sharper. Tobin froze. The orb's glow wavered. From the shadows above, something stirred. Claws scraped stone, a guttural hiss echoing down the shaft. Shadows moved, too quick to track, skittering across the walls. One of the statue's twisted kin had followed, or perhaps something worse, drawn by the orb's light. Faster, Bramble hissed, eyes wide. They hurried, feet pounding against stone and light alike. The staircase shook, dust raining down as the thing descended after them, unseen but too close. A claw struck the wall, sparks scattering into the dark. Tobin held the orb over his head, and the glow blazed brighter, searing the shadows back. For an instant the creature was revealed, tall and gaunt, skin like blackened stone, eyes burning blue. Its limbs bent backward, claws dragging furrows into the wall as it clung like a spider. It shrieked, and the sound pierced bone. The orb flared in Tobin's hand, almost blinding. The creature reeled, but it did not fall. It clung tighter, screeching, following no matter how bright the light. Go! Tobin shouted. The final curve appeared, the bottom, the heart's glow blazing stronger now, filling the shaft with shifting light. The staircase ended at a platform carved of polished stone. They leapt the last gap, stumbling onto solid ground as the hum grew deafening. The creature shrieked again, climbing closer. Tobin held the orb forward toward the great crystal heart that pulsed at the center of the chamber. It was immense, taller than any of them, suspended in a cradle of stone like a jewel in a crown. Cracks webbed across its surface, leaking light like water from a shattered dam. The orb in his hand pulsed in rhythm with it. Lark, Tobin cried over the hum. What do we do? She shook her head, eyes fixed on the crystal. It's broken, weak, but the orb, maybe it's a piece of it meant to return. Bramble stared upward, where the creature was almost upon them. Then hurry! Tobin stepped forward, the orb blazing so bright it scorched his palm. He pressed it against the heart of the crystal. The chamber exploded with light. The brilliance seared away every shadow. Tobin staggered back, covering his eyes, but he didn't drop the orb. It had fused into the great crystal, the cracks sealing around it like veins knitting flesh. The hum rose into a song, no longer fractured but whole, resonant and fierce. The creature shrieked, clinging to the wall as the light struck it. Its stone like skin cracked, fissures glowing white-hot. It howled once more, a sound of fury and despair, before it shattered, splintering into shards that rained into the depths below. Silence followed. Only the song of the crystal remained, deep and steady, filling the chamber like a heartbeat. Tobin collapsed onto his knees, chest heaving. Lark knelt beside him, eyes shining with tears. You did it, she whispered. You mended it. Bramble leaned against the platform, pale but alive. "You nearly got us killed," he muttered. Then, after a pause, "But you did it." The crystal's glow softened, no longer blinding but radiant, bathing them in warmth. Its light reached into every corner of the chamber, flowing back up the shaft, through cracks in the walls, pushing against centuries of darkness. They felt it in their bones. The tower was awake again. For a long while they sat in silence, breathing, listening. No more skittering, no more claws, only the hum, steady and calm. At last, Lark rose, running her hands over the runes carved into the platform. "It wasn't just a prison," she said softly. "It was a beacon, a ward. When it cracked, the shadows escaped. That's what those things were, corruption, feeding on the emptiness. And now," Tobin asked, standing slowly, "now it holds again. The light is whole." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "Because of you." Tobin shook his head. "Because of us." They made their way back, the crystal's glow guiding them. The stare of stone and light seemed steadier now, no longer trembling. The chamber of runes sang faintly as they passed, no longer sorrowful but hopeful. Even the hall of statues, though scarred and broken, felt less ominous, as though some burden had lifted. By the time they emerged into the upper ruins, dawn was breaking. The forest beyond the tower glowed with morning light, dew sparkling on leaves, birdsong rising with the sun. For the first time since they entered, the air smelled fresh, untainted. Bramble breathed deep, then grinned crookedly. "I've never been so happy to see trees." Lark laughed, soft and weary. "You'll write about it now, won't you?" He grimaced. "Maybe. Though if I do, I'll make myself the hero." Tobin smiled faintly, the memory of the crystal's warmth still in his chest. He didn't know what they had truly awakened or what it meant for the world beyond their small village. But he knew one thing. They had walked where no one dared, faced shadows their kind had fled from, and returned with light instead of fear. As they stepped out into the clearing, the tower behind them shimmered faintly in the sun. No longer broken, no longer silent. The adventure was over for now, but Tobin felt the weight of a new beginning stirring on the horizon. And deep within, the crystal's hum whispered still, steady, eternal, waiting for what would come next. The end. And so, our friends take another step on their path, their laughter and courage carrying them forward into the unknown. Perhaps their story ends here tonight, but the forest still waits with countless mysteries to share. Thank you for joining me by the fireside. Until next time, may your days be filled with light, warmth, and just a little bit of wonder.